the youngest MVP in NBA history, had his knees destroyed by fate. The most fundamentally sound point guard in the league is considered boring. The greatest floor general without a ring keeps finding new ways to lose. These aren't coincidences. I'm arguing that there's a 7-level hierarchy that the NBA uses to control narratives and manipulate how we see players. I'll show you the players who get boxed in and why the league benefits from keeping them there. The system starts with its most brutal level, where promising careers go to die on draft night. The system's favorite scapegoats. Picture this. You're drafted 6th overall in the 2009 NBA draft. The whole world watching, millions of dollars on the line, and somehow you become basketball's biggest punchline. Your name gets thrown around like a curse word in draft discussions. Every sports talk show uses you as the example of what not to do. You're not just a player who didn't work out, you're a warning label. League media and front offices often use lottery busts as cautionary examples for every draft class that follows. They need these narratives to justify their scouting systems. Every draft class gets reminded about the kid who had all the tools but couldn't put it together. The league points to these guys and says, see what happens when you don't work hard enough, don't listen to coaches, don't take it seriously. But here's what they don't tell you. Johnny Flynn wasn't actually that much worse than other prospects in his draft class. This dude just got stuck with the wrong narrative and couldn't escape it. Flynn had solid college numbers, passed every workout, had the size scouts wanted for a point guard. His college tape showed a player who could score and create for others. Teams saw enough to draft him 6th overall. The problem wasn't his ability. Once you get labeled a bust, every mistake gets magnified tenfold. Every turnover becomes proof you can't handle the position. Every missed shot confirms you're not NBA material. Every struggle becomes evidence that the critics were right all along. The league needs these cautionary tales to explain away their own failures in evaluation. When teams whiff on lottery picks, they don't admit their evaluation process is flawed. They blame the player for not living up to potential. They create a story where the failure was inevitable, where the signs were always there if you looked hard enough. Michael Carter-Williams won Rookie of the Year after averaging 16.7 points, 6.3 assists, and 6.2 rebounds, then spent his entire career fighting the fluke label that the media slapped on him immediately after. This dude had a historic rookie season, putting up numbers that should have established him as a cornerstone player. But instead of building on that success, the narrative machine went to work. Suddenly, his rookie year wasn't impressive, it was unsustainable. His triple-doubles weren't signs of versatility, they were empty stats on bad teams. Teams stopped believing in him not because his skills disappeared overnight, but because the narrative said he was supposed to fail. Front offices started viewing him as a cautionary tale rather than a player with proven ability. Flynn got the label, MCW got the fluke tag, 2 different endings from early promise. Here's the dirty secret about level 1 players. These guys aren't disasters. They're sacrificial lambs for a system that refuses to admit it doesn't know how to evaluate talent. The NBA's draft process is basically throwing darts at a board, but they can't admit that publicly. So when they miss, they need someone to blame. They need players who can carry the weight of organizational failure. The league turns these players into cautionary tales like they're writing Greek tragedies. Every bust becomes a morality play about work ethic, character, and dedication. The real story, that talent evaluation, is mostly guesswork, and luck doesn't sell as well as stories about players who didn't want it enough. Level 1 isn't about lack of ability. It's about being chosen as the example of what happens when you don't live up to impossible expectations set by people who don't actually know how to predict success. These players become the scapegoats for every front office mistake, every scouting failure, every draft reach that backfired. But the real tragedy isn't their careers. These guys still made millions playing a game they love. The real tragedy is how the league uses their stories to control every other young player coming up. Every rookie gets reminded about the busts who came before them. Every second-round pick gets told they're lucky to be there because look what happened to lottery selections who didn't appreciate the opportunity. The system creates these cautionary tales because fear is the most effective form of control in professional sports. But sometimes the opposite happens. Sometimes magic strikes from nowhere, and that terrifies the league even more than failure. When lightning strikes once. What if I told you the most electrifying stretch in NBA history lasted exactly 25 games and the league and media scrambled to explain it and then to contain it? Those games changed how we think about overnight stardom, underdogs, and whether the NBA's star-making machine actually knows what it's doing. The NBA is obsessed with creating stars through their carefully planned pipeline. Draft the right college player, give him the right team situation, market him the right way, and boom, you've got your next franchise cornerstone. They've built an entire industrial complex around identifying and developing talent according to their blueprint. But sometimes magic happens organically, and that scares them way more than outright failure ever could. Jeremy Lin wasn't supposed to happen. An undrafted Asian American guard taking over New York wasn't in anyone's marketing plan or focus group research. This dude was sleeping on couches, getting cut by teams, and barely hanging onto roster spots. Then he exploded for those 3 weeks in February, dropping 38 points on the Lakers on February 10, 2012, the moment that broke the internet, and suddenly everyone in the world was watching Knicks games. Kids were buying his jersey faster than they could print them. Lin's sanity proved that talent can emerge from anywhere, anytime, without following the league's approved development path. That threatens the entire draft system and scouting industrial complex the NBA has spent decades building. If some random undrafted guy can become the most exciting player in basketball overnight, what does that say about all those lottery picks who never lived up to expectations? What does it say about the millions spent on scouting departments and player development programs? So what did they do? They turned Lin into a cautionary tale about unsustainable success, making sure everyone knew it was just a fluke. The narrative shifted from celebration to skepticism faster than his crossover. Suddenly, every analyst was explaining why his style of play wouldn't work long-term. Every scout was pointing out the holes in his game that other teams would eventually exploit. The league needed everyone to understand that this wasn't how stars are really made. The message became clear: enjoy the show, but don't expect it to last, because this isn't how the system is supposed to work. Isaiah Thomas represents the flip side of the same problem. This dude was pure fury, standing at just over 5 feet, putting up massive scoring numbers and carrying the Celtics on his back during his 2016-17 season. He averaged 29 points per game that season before the hip issue turned the narrative into a tragedy. He was everything the NBA claims to love about underdogs and heart over height. The perfect inspiration story for kids who don't fit the physical mold of a typical NBA star. Until his hip injury gave the league the perfect excuse to write him off completely. The narrative machine immediately shifted from inspirational underdog to injury-prone liability faster than you could say Brinks truck. Suddenly, his size wasn't charming anymore. It was a liability that made him more susceptible to getting hurt. His scoring wasn't impressive, it was unsustainable, and came at the expense of team defense. Teams that had been lining up to sign him suddenly disappeared. Front offices that had praised his heart and determination started questioning whether he could still perform at an elite level. The same player who had been celebrated as the little engine that could become damaged goods overnight. Lin, flash. Thomas, peak then body. Both. The system punishes unpredictability. These players didn't fail at level 2. They succeeded too much, too fast, without following the league's approved path from lottery pick to stardom. They proved that the carefully constructed development system isn't the only way to reach elite performance. That's dangerous thinking in a league that depends on predictable pipelines and controllable narratives. The NBA's star-making machine works like a Hollywood studio system. They want to discover talent, develop it according to their methods, and control how that talent gets presented to the public. Players who break out organically disrupt that control and make the system look unnecessary. Level 2, players get punished for proving that the system doesn't control who becomes great. Sometimes greatness just happens, and when it does, the league scrambles to explain why it won't last or shouldn't be taken seriously. They need these players to flame out quickly, so everyone remembers that sustainable success only comes through approved channels. The league tolerates brief magic, but only if it doesn't threaten their carefully constructed hierarchy of who deserves to be a star. But some players figured out a different approach entirely. If the system won't let you be the star, maybe you can find another way to become absolutely essential. The professional irritants. Some players figured out the game within the game become absolutely essential in a way that drives everyone crazy. These guys crack the code on how to turn being annoying into a career. They realize that being a pest could be just as valuable as being talented, maybe more valuable, because annoying lasts longer than athletic ability. Patrick Beverley carved out a long career as a defensive, high-energy guard after being drafted 42nd in 2009. This dude turned pest play into a marketable role that paid him millions. He wasn't the most talented defender in the league, but he was the most annoying one, and that distinction made all the difference. Beverley figured out that being the guy everyone wants to punch could pay just as well as being the guy everyone wants to cheer for. But here's the thing. Beverley isn't just playing defense out there. He's playing a character that creates storylines and keeps people watching. When he gets under the skin of a superstar, it makes that superstar look more composed by comparison. When he talks trash and loses, it reinforces narratives about talent beating effort. When he talks trash and wins, it creates drama that generates clicks licks and conversations. He's become professional wrestling's heel character, except in basketball uniforms. Shaun Livingston's comeback is inspiring, but the backstory includes a forced role change, which is a detail rarely emphasized in highlight reels. After his disastrous 2007 knee injury that tore multiple ligaments and required extensive rehab, he eventually found a veteran role and won 3 rings with Golden State. The way most people tell it, this dude suffered one of the most gruesome injuries in basketball history, then willed himself back to NBA relevance through pure determination. But the real story is way more complex than that. Livingston had to completely rebuild his identity and accept a supporting role because the league had already written him off. Before his injury, he was supposed to be a franchise point guard with star potential. After his injury, he had to learn that his value was completely different now. He wasn't coming back to be the player he used to be. He was coming back to be whoever the league was willing to let him be. His miraculous comeback wasn't just about healing his knee and learning to play again. It was about learning to fit into the box the NBA was willing to give him. He had to accept being the veteran presence, the steady hand, the guy who could give you quality minutes without demanding touches or recognition. His comeback required giving up his dreams of stardom and embracing a role as a supporting character. These players survive by becoming useful archetypes: the pest, the veteran presence, the comeback story. They figured out which character the NBA needed them to play and committed to that performance completely. Their success came from understanding that the league has space for certain types of supporting characters, and if you can fill that role effectively, you can build a career around it. Level 3 isn't about grit or heart or any of that inspirational stuff the league likes to talk about. It's about players who learned to market themselves as supporting characters in other people's stories. They found success by accepting that the league would never see them as leading men, only as valuable role players in the narratives of others. But sometimes knowing your place in the ecosystem isn't enough. Sometimes you can do everything right, play your role perfectly, and still find yourself trapped in a different kind of prison, one where being too good at the wrong things becomes its own curse. The vanilla excellence trap. Which is more valuable, a flashy highlight maker or an invisible engine that wins 50 games a year? What's the worst thing you can be in the NBA? Not bad boring. Because boring doesn't sell jerseys, generate clicks, or create storylines. Bad players get cut and forgotten. Boring players get stuck in basketball purgatory. Good enough to stay in the league, but not interesting enough to matter. The league has perfected the art of damning players with faint praise, and nowhere is this clearer than with fundamentally sound point guards. These guys do everything right on paper. They take care of the ball, make the right passes, hit their free throws, and rarely make mistakes that show up on highlight reels. But that's exactly the problem: they don't show up on highlight reels at all. Mike Conley has been underrated for so long that being underrated became his entire brand, which is exactly where the NBA wants him. This dude has spent his whole career being called the most underrated point guard in basketball. Every season, some analyst writes an article about how Mike Conley doesn't get enough respect. He even won the Twyman Stokes Teammate of the Year award in 2023 through 24, the perfect recognition for a player who does everything right without demanding attention. But here's the thing: if he's been underrated for over a decade, maybe he's not actually underrated anymore. Maybe he's rated exactly where he belongs. The league keeps him in this weird middle space where he's too good to ignore but too boring to promote. He's become the perfect middle-tier player who makes everyone else look more exciting by comparison. Conley plays like a computer program designed to execute basketball fundamentals. The league needs these steady, reliable guys to make their flashy stars seem more special. Conley's consistency makes Curry's explosiveness feel more magical. When you watch a fundamentally sound point guard methodically run pick and rolls for 40 minutes, it makes those 30-foot bombs look like acts of divine intervention. Rajon Rondo represents the flip side of this trap basketball genius, who was the engine behind Boston's 2008 title run and produced huge playoff performances throughout his career. But his personality created friction that made him impossible to package into the perfect point guard story the NBA wanted to sell. This dude could see plays developing 3 passes before they happened. He could thread passes through traffic that looked impossible on replay. His court vision was so advanced it seemed like he was playing chess while everyone else played checkers. But his personality made front offices nervous. The league wants point guards to be floor generals who make everyone around them better while staying humble and coachable. Rondo made everyone better, but did it with an attitude that didn't fit the league's marketing template for what a franchise point guard should look like. So they turned his basketball IQ into a backhanded compliment: great player, but he was too smart for his own good, too stubborn to coach, too difficult to manage. His genius became a liability because it came with personality quirks that made him steady but not beloved. The NBA prefers players who are smart enough to run their offense but not so smart that they They question why the offense isn't better designed. They want floor generals who lead by example, not by challenging authority. Rondo's problem wasn't his basketball intelligence. It was that he used that intelligence to think for himself instead of just following instructions. Level 4 players are trapped in purgatory, too good to dismiss but too inconvenient to truly promote. They exist in basketball's middle class, comfortable enough to stick around but never rich enough to run the neighborhood. The league uses them as benchmarks, good enough to make other players look better when they outperform them, never quite good enough to deserve the spotlight themselves. But sometimes even having all the talent in the world isn't enough to escape the system's control. Sometimes the most devastating trap isn't being boring or difficult, it's being perfect at the worst possible moment, when fate becomes the villain. The cruelest level isn't about lacking talent, it's about having all the talent in the world and watching forces beyond your control tear it away. These guys didn't fail because they weren't good enough. They failed because the universe decided to remind everyone that basketball is just a game and real life doesn't care about your MVP trophy or your perfect fundamentals. The NBA loves a tragedy because it creates sympathy without threatening their existing power structure. These players can't challenge anyone anymore. They become safe stories to tell, cautionary tales that don't make current stars look bad by comparison. The league can point to their careers and say, see, even the most talented guys need luck to truly succeed. Derrick Rose was the youngest MVP in NBA history when he won the award in 2011 at age 22, but his subsequent knee injuries gave the league the perfect excuse to pivot away from a player who didn't fit their marketing mold. This dude was everything you could want in a superstar: explosive athleticism, clutch performances, hometown hero storyline in Chicago. But he was also quiet, introspective, and didn't play the media game the way the league prefers their faces of the franchise to operate. When his knees started falling apart, the narrative shifted immediately from what an incredible player he was to what an incredible story his comeback attempts were. Rose's story gets sold as inspiration, and what could have been? But notice how quickly the league moved on to other narratives once he was no longer a threat to dominate games. His injuries were real, devastating, and tragic, but the speed with which he was written off reveals how expendable even MVPs are when they can't deliver championships. Chris Paul represents a different kind of tragedy, one of the all-time leaders in assists and steals, who did everything right but couldn't overcome circumstances beyond his control. This dude has perfect fundamentals, incredible basketball IQ, and leadership skills that coaches dream about. He makes every team better immediately. His teammates rave about playing with him. His coaches call him the smartest player they've ever worked with. But somehow none of that translates into the ultimate prize. Chris Paul's ringless career isn't just about his individual failures. Sports media and branding sometimes favor storylines that sell, and that can overshadow players whose arc doesn't fit easy. Dramatic storytelling. Paul's story is too clean, too professional, too fundamentally sound to create the drama that modern basketball marketing requires. The point guard label sounds like praise, but it's actually a prison. He's too good to ignore, but somehow never good enough for the ultimate prize. Every season, analysts talk about how he's the missing piece for championship contenders. Every playoff run, people debate whether this is finally his year. But the label itself reveals the problem: he's a basketball deity who can't deliver the only thing that really matters in professional sports. His perfectionism becomes a liability because perfect doesn't create storylines. Perfect doesn't generate controversy. Perfect doesn't make fans argue on social media about whether he belongs in championship conversations. The league needs their stars to have flaws that create debate and drama. Paul's flaw is that he doesn't have enough interesting flaws. Level 5 players become cautionary tales about how even perfection isn't enough if fate and context don't align exactly right. Rose had superstar talent, but his body betrayed him. Paul had everything except the right circumstances and teammates to win when it mattered most. Their stories remind everyone that basketball is still just a game played by human beings in a world full of random events. But sometimes fate works the other way. Sometimes players don't just overcome the system's limitations, they prove those limitations were wrong all along and force everyone else to catch up to what they made possible. The blueprint makers. These revolutionaries didn't just succeed within the system, they forced the entire league to rebuild itself around what they proved was possible. Level 6 is where individual greatness becomes so undeniable that it reshapes what the point guard position means for everyone who comes after. These players were initially viewed skeptically. Then their results forced adjustment across the entire league. The NBA doesn't like change. They like predictable formulas that produce consistent entertainment value. When players come along and prove that their assumptions about basketball are wrong, the league pushes back hard before eventually surrendering to reality. John Stockton is the NBA's all-time leader in both assists and steals, records that redefined what efficiency meant for a point guard and forced teams to completely rethink their offensive philosophy. philosophy. This dude turned basketball into a science project, proving that perfect execution could be more devastating than athletic brilliance. His partnership with Karl Malone created a template for pick-and-roll excellence that the league initially saw as boring, but couldn't argue with the results. Stockton was known around the league for using his body to set picks on much bigger players, absorbing punishment while freeing up teammates for baskets. He turned his physical limitations into weapons, proving that intelligence and toughness could overcome size disadvantages. Isaiah Thomas led the Bad Boys Pistons to championships in the 1980s, despite being dismissed as too small for championship basketball. The 80s were all about size and strength. Teams built around massive front courts who could pound opponents into submission. Thomas walked into that environment and decided he was going to out-tough guys who had significant physical advantages. His championships with Detroit forced the league to acknowledge that heart and basketball IQ could overcome physical limitations, a lesson they're still learning today. Thomas didn't just succeed. Despite his size, he used his size as motivation to develop skills that bigger players never bothered learning. Jason Kidd made triple-doubles routine before they became trendy and led the New Jersey Nets to back-to-back finals appearances before later winning a title with the Mavericks. This dude was grabbing rebounds like a forward, running fast breaks like a track star, and threading passes through impossible angles. He turned the point guard position into a Swiss Army knife, proving that one player could impact winning in multiple ways simultaneously. Kidd took a team that nobody cared about and made them appointment television just by showing up and doing everything on the basketball court. These three players didn't just succeed within the existing framework. They proved the conventional wisdom wrong and forced everyone else to adapt to their innovations. They walked into a league with established rules about what point guards could and couldn't do, then completely ignored those limitations until the league had to rewrite the position description. Stockton made efficiency cool. Thomas made heart more important than height. Kidd made versatility essential. Each one faced resistance from a league that preferred predictable archetypes, but their results were too overwhelming to ignore. They didn't just play the game, they rewrote it, creating new standards that every point guard since has been measured against. Level 6 players earned their status by being so undeniably effective that the league had to change its rules and expectations around them. They forced basketball to evolve whether it wanted to or not. But even these legends had to work within certain constraints, had to prove themselves according to existing measures of success like championships and statistical dominance. But there's one final level where even those constraints disappear completely, where players don't just change how the game is played, they change what the game itself can become. The untouchable architects. At the top of the hierarchy sit players who didn't just change basketball, they changed reality itself, forcing the entire sport to revolve around their vision. These guys didn't just win games or break records. They broke the fundamental assumptions about what was possible on a basketball court and made everyone else rebuild their understanding of the sport from scratch. The GOAT debate isn't really about who was better. It's about which revolutionary approach to the position you prefer. Do you want the guy who proved positions were meaningless or the guy who proved distance was just a suggestion? Both approaches completely changed the game. Everything coaches thought they knew about basketball, but they did it in completely different ways during completely different eras. Magic Johnson and Stephen Curry represent two completely different eras of basketball evolution, but both faced the same challenge, proving the impossible was actually inevitable. Both walked into a league that had strict rules about what point guards could and couldn't do, then completely ignored those rules until everyone else had no choice but to follow their lead. Magic was standing at 6'9", playing point guard when that combination literally didn't exist. This dude had to convince the entire league that positions were just suggestions, not scientific laws. Coaches had spent decades building their systems around the idea that tall players stay near the basket and short players handle the ball. Magic walked onto an NBA court and said, "Watch me do both at the same time." His arrival was met with skepticism because scouts couldn't figure out how to categorize him. Was he a forward who could pass, or a guard who happened to be tall? The league's evaluation system broke down completely when trying to project how his unique combination of size and skill would translate. But Magic didn't care about their categories. He just went out and made basketball look like performance art. His Showtime Lakers didn't just win 5 championships, they created an entertainment model that the NBA still uses to market itself today. Magic turned basketball games into must-see television events. The fast breaks, the no-look passes, the theatrical celebrations, all of that became the template for how the league sells itself to casual fans who want excitement along with their sports. Curry changed the game by shooting from distances that coaches had spent decades telling players to avoid, and somehow made it mathematically sound. This dude faced early doubts about his ability to succeed because of his slight frame, and his reliance on shots that traditional basketball wisdom said were bad shots. But Curry didn't just take deep threes, he made them at percentages that turned bad shots into great shots, becoming the all-time leader in made three-pointers. His unprecedented range and quick release revolutionized basketball completely. Teams that had spent years perfecting defensive schemes suddenly had to guard players 30 feet from the basket. The three-point revolution he started forced every team in the league to completely rebuild their offensive and defensive strategies around the threat of deep shooting. Curry's Warriors dynasty wasn't just about winning championships, it was about rewriting the rules of offense. They proved that pace and space could beat size and strength. They showed that shooting could be more valuable than rebounding. They made every other team in the league question whether their entire approach to basketball was outdated. Both players succeeded because they refused to accept the limitations that the league tried to place on their positions. Magic ignored height restrictions. Curry ignored range restrictions. They took the box that the NBA tried to put point guards in and completely destroyed it, then built something entirely new from the pieces. Magic rewired the position by size. Curry rewired it by distance. Both forced everyone to relearn basketball. They didn't just master basketball as it existed, they invented new versions of basketball that everyone else had to learn how to play. Level 7 players don't compete within the system. They become the system, forcing everyone else to adapt to their vision of what basketball should be. They're untouchable because they didn't just master the game, they redefined what mastery itself means for every player who comes after them. But now that you understand how these 7 levels work, the real question becomes obvious. The hierarchy's true purpose, who decides which level each player gets assigned to and why those decisions get made, reveals everything about how this system actually works. The NBA's point guard hierarchy isn't a natural ranking system based on talent. It's a control mechanism designed to manage narratives, expectations, and ultimately, money. The league creates stories that sell tickets and generate buzz. They need heroes and villains, comebacks, and cautionary tales. Labels matter more than on-court skill because stories sell, so question the tag before you buy it. If you made it this far, leave a like and tell me which level you think Derrick Rose belongs in. Argue in the comments. Which players are genuinely failures and which ones did the system just fail? Decide in the comments.